Officer Kyle Draper had a rule about gas stations on the edge of his patrol zone. One he'd never written down anywhere, but had followed for the better part of 6 years. Anyone loitering near the pumps after dark, especially anyone who didn't look, in his private estimation, like they belonged to the neighborhood the station technically sat in, was worth a closer look. The man standing at Pump 4 that Friday night fit the profile the moment Draper's cruiser rolled past. Tall, black, mid-30s, wearing a plain black jacket over a grey hoodie, leaning against a nondescript sedan while the pump ran, phone in hand, glancing occasionally toward the convenience store's fluorescent-lit window as if waiting for something. Nothing about him was unusual. People pumped gas at night, people checked their phones, people waited for receipts to print. But Draper's private calculus had never required much to activate, and tonight it activated on almost nothing at all.
He parked at an angle that blocked the man's most direct route back to the driver's seat and got out, unhurried, his hand resting near his belt in the particular, practiced posture he used whenever he wanted a stop to feel less like a conversation than an inspection. "Evening. Mind telling me what you're doing out here?" "Getting gas." The man's tone was even, unbothered, the tone of someone who had encountered this exact question in this exact context more times than he cared to count. "Tank's almost full, waiting on my receipt." "You live around here?" "No." "Then what brings you to this station specifically?" "It was the nearest one with a working pump when my tank hit empty. I'm passing through on I-40. Draper studied him for a long moment, the particular, deliberate scrutiny of a man searching for a reason rather than responding to one that had already presented itself. "You got ID?"
The man, Terrence Boyd, 36, though Draper hadn't bothered to actually ask his name yet, produced a driver's license without complaint, handing it over with the same unhurried composure he'd carried through the entire exchange so far. "This a rental?" Draper asked, glancing at the sedan. "Yes." "You mind if I take a look inside?" "I'd rather you didn't, but I understand you're going to ask regardless of what I say. So go ahead and tell me what your actual reason is first." The response landed with a flatness that Draper, in his private accounting, chose to read not as reasonable pushback, but as confirmation of exactly the suspicion he'd arrived with before he'd asked a single question. "My reason is I've got a right to conduct a safety check on a vehicle stopped at a gas pump after dark in a high-incident area. This station's had 2 incidents in the last 3 years, both after 2 a.m., neither involving a parked vehicle at the pumps. I looked it up on the drive-in, since I figured I might need to know it." Terrence's tone remained level, though something in it had sharpened slightly. The patience of a man who understood exactly how quickly patience alone was likely to resolve this particular situation. "I'm not trying to make this difficult. I'm trying to understand what specifically about me pumping gas at a well-lit station warranted a stop." Draper didn't answer the question, because the honest answer had nothing to do with the station's incident history, and everything to do with a private, unexamined instinct he'd never once been forced to justify to anyone with the standing to actually demand a real one. Instead, he circled the sedan, peering through the windows with the exaggerated, theatrical care of a man expecting to find something significant. And it was on his second pass around the vehicle, while Terrence remained standing near the pump, hands visible, expression unreadable, that Draper's hand dipped briefly into his own jacket pocket before reaching beneath the sedan's rear wheel well. It came back, holding a small plastic bag, its contents catching the harsh fluorescent glow of the station's overhead lights. "Well, look at this." Terrence's expression didn't change, not immediately, though something in his posture went very still. Not the stillness of panic, but the particular focused stillness of a man rapidly recalculating everything he understood about the next several minutes of his life. "That bag was not in or under my vehicle before you started walking around it." "That's what they all say." "Officer." Terrence said the word with a precision that carried more weight than its single syllable should have allowed. "I'm going to give you one chance to reconsider what you're about to do, because I don't think you understand yet exactly how badly this is going to go for you if you don't." Draper laughed, a short, dismissive sound, already reaching for his cuffs. Turn around. Part 2. The call from the back seat. They put him in the back of the cruiser, with the bag logged as evidence and a charge already forming in Draper's head before they'd even left the gas station. Possession with intent, given the quantity. A number Draper had privately decided sounded impressive enough to justify the stop after the fact, regardless of how it had actually come to exist. Terence sat in the back seat, hands cuffed behind him, and said almost nothing for the first several minutes of the drive, watching the gas station's lights recede in the window, running through, with the same disciplined, methodical calm he'd maintained since the bag first appeared in Draper's hand, exactly what came next. "I want my phone call when we get to the station," he said, finally. "You'll get it. I also want you to know, before we get there, that everything happening right now is being recorded independently of your dashcam, and I'd strongly recommend you think carefully about what you write in your report before you write it." Draper glanced at him in the rearview mirror, irritation flickering across his face. "Recorded how? You're cuffed in the back of my car." "There's a device in the lining of my jacket. Standard equipment for federal agents conducting off-duty travel through unfamiliar jurisdictions."
Terence's voice remained perfectly even, delivering the information not as a threat but as a simple, unavoidable fact, the way a man might mention the weather. "I'd also recommend you consider the possibility that a rental sedan, driven by a federal law enforcement officer traveling on approved travel orders, might have been selected for exactly this kind of scrutiny by someone who's been watching this specific stretch of highway for reasons that have nothing to do with you personally and everything to do with a pattern this exact stop just became the newest entry in." Draper's hands tightened on the wheel, the particular defensive stiffening of a man who has just heard something he doesn't want to believe and doesn't yet know how to dismiss. "You're not FBI." "Special Agent Terence Boyd, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Charlotte Field Office. My credential is in my jacket's interior pocket, which you never checked, because you were more interested in what you'd already decided to find under my rear wheel well than in verifying who you'd actually stopped." Neither of them spoke again for the rest of the drive. What Draper did not know, what he would not fully understand until considerably later that night, was that Terence Boyd's presence at that specific gas station, on that specific stretch of interstate, had not been the random, unremarkable coincidence Draper's private profile had assumed it to be. Terence was, in fact, traveling as part of a federal civil rights review, examining a cluster of complaints from 3 counties along this exact interstate corridor, all describing a similar pattern. Traffic and parking lot stops involving black male drivers, disproportionately concentrated at gas stations and rest areas after dark. Several of them alleging planted evidence that local prosecutors had, in each case, declined to pursue due to what their own case notes described as insufficient corroboration beyond the defendant's account. He had chosen this particular route deliberately, on this particular night, specifically because Draper's name had already surfaced twice in the complaint file. Not as the arresting officer of record, but as a backup unit present at 2 of the 3 prior incidents. A detail that had struck the review team as significant enough to warrant closer observation, though not yet significant enough to justify formal action without more direct evidence. He had, in the driest possible sense, been waiting to see if it would happen to him, too. The desk sergeant at the county station scanned Terence's personal effects into the property log with the same bored efficiency he applied to every intake that night, right up until the moment his scanner registered the federal credential clipped inside the jacket's interior pocket. A credential Draper had never checked, tucked into evidence without a second glance, exactly the way Terence had known it would be if the stop unfolded the way the pattern predicted it would. The alert reached the review team's supervising agent within 90 seconds. Special Agent in charge, Priya Anand, was in her car within 4 minutes, 2 additional agents following in a second vehicle,
moving toward the county station with the particular, controlled urgency of people who understood, before they'd even confirmed the details, that whatever had happened tonight was either about to become the single most important piece of evidence their 8-month investigation had produced, or a serious problem requiring immediate containment. And that, either way, speed mattered considerably more than caution. Part 3. What the wheel well cost him. Anand arrived to find Terence still seated in a holding area, cuffs removed, but no formal release yet processed, his expression carrying the same disciplined, unhurried calm it had carried since the moment the bag first appeared at Pump 4. "You good?" "I'm fine." I wanted on the record that at no point did I resist, argue, or do anything beyond calmly informing the arresting officer that the evidence he produced had not been present before he began searching my vehicle. "Noted. And it's about to matter a great deal, because we've got considerably more than your account to work with." Anand's expression tightened. The jacket recording caught the entire stop, start to finish, including audio of Officer Draper's own voice, about 11 seconds before he discovered the bag, muttering something to himself that sounds a great deal like, "Let's see what we've got here," before he'd actually found anything to have. That's consistent with the pattern in the other 3 files. It's better than consistent. It's the first time we've had it captured cleanly, start to finish, on independent audio, corroborated by a federal agent's sworn statement, rather than a civilian account a local prosecutor can quietly decide isn't corroborated enough. Draper, informed of Terence's actual identity by his own shift supervisor, roughly 20 minutes after booking had concluded, experienced the particular, vertiginous collapse of a man watching 6 years of unchallenged certainty disintegrate in the space of a single conversation. The realization that the man he'd cuffed at Pump 4 wasn't simply a stranger passing through, but the exact kind of witness capable of transforming a private, unexamined habit into a federal case file with teeth. "There's been a misunderstanding," he told his supervisor, his voice carrying none of the swagger it had carried at the gas station less than an hour earlier. "I found that bag exactly where I said I found it." "Then you won't have any objection to us reviewing the footage from his jacket alongside your own dashcam," his supervisor said, in a tone that made clear the objection, whatever it turned out to be, would not matter. The footage, once synchronized and reviewed in full, left almost nothing open to interpretation. Draper's own dashcam, angled from the cruiser, showed him reaching briefly into his jacket pocket during his second pass around the sedan, a motion easy to miss without knowing to look for it, but unmistakable once cross-referenced against the jacket-mounted audio, which captured the soft rustle of plastic and Draper's murmured anticipation in the 11 seconds before his hand emerged from beneath the wheel well, holding exactly what he'd apparently placed there. "I want to understand something," Anand said, during Draper's interview 2 days later, his own department's Internal Affairs Division now present alongside the federal team, the county having lost any meaningful claim to handling this internally the moment a federal agent's sworn statement entered the file. 2 prior complaints from residents of this corridor, both alleging planted evidence in traffic stops you were present for. Both declined for prosecution due to insufficient corroboration. Can you explain to me how a third, nearly identical incident happens, with you specifically involved each time, before anyone thought to ask the question this file is now going to force into the open? Draper had no answer that survived the specificity of the question, because the honest one, that a private, unexamined habit had simply never before collided with a witness the system couldn't quietly dismiss, was not one he was in any position to offer, without confirming exactly what the federal file already suspected. He was terminated within the week, arrested the following month on charges of evidence tampering, deprivation of rights under color of law, and obstruction of justice. The federal complaint explicitly incorporating the 2 prior declined cases as evidence of an established pattern, rather than treating Terence's stop as an isolated incident. His attorney, at trial, attempted the argument such attorneys typically attempt, that the jacket recording's audio was ambiguous, that "let's see what we've got here" could describe an officer beginning a legitimate search rather than concealing an illegitimate one. That 6 years of service without formal disciplinary action deserved weight against a single contested incident. The argument collapsed under the combined weight of the synchronized footage, Terrence's own precise, unshaken testimony, and, most damagingly, a search of Draper's patrol vehicle conducted as part of the federal investigation, which recovered a small remaining quantity of the same substance in a compartment beneath the driver's seat, packaged in bags matching the one recovered at the gas station. Evidence that transformed the case from a disputed account of one incident into physical proof of an ongoing practice. He was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 9 years, with a permanent federal bar from law enforcement employment. A sentence the presiding judge tied explicitly to the 2 declined prior cases as much as to Terrence's own, noting in her remarks that this defendant's conduct did not begin with Special Agent Boyd, and it would not have ended with him either, had circumstance not finally provided a witness this system could not quietly set aside. Special Agent Terrence Boyd returned to his review of the interstate corridor within a month, the case that had nearly ended in a false conviction becoming, instead, the piece of evidence that finally moved 2 previously stalled local prosecutions forward, both of the earlier complainants receiving, for the first time, a serious institutional review of accounts that had sat, disbelieved, in dormant files for years. He gave a brief statement to the 2 men whose earlier cases his own arrest had inadvertently revived, meeting them individually rather than through any formal public forum, a choice he later described, when asked, as simply feeling like the more honest way to close the loop. "I didn't go looking for what happened to me at that gas station," he told one of them, "but I understood, the moment that bag came out of Officer Draper's hand, that I had something the 2 of you never had a chance to have. A credential loud enough that nobody could quietly file my account away the way they filed yours. That's not justice working the way it's supposed to. That's justice finally tripping over a piece of evidence it couldn't ignore. I'm sorry it took this long, and I'm sorry it took someone like me instead of simply believing you the first time." He kept, from the case, a single detail in his own working file, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of exactly what the review existed to catch. The 11 seconds of audio between Draper's murmured anticipation and the moment the bag appeared in his hand. 11 seconds that had taken 2 prior disbelieved complaints and 1 federal agent's jacket-mounted recorder to finally become undeniable. The end.